Salisbury, Maryland. There wasn't much to do in Salisbury. I've been in bands since I was 11. We played rhythm and blues and soul, because that was my thing. My guitar player had a friend from Santa Cruz. He said, I'm going to show you something and tell me if you can help me. He had brought a guitar amplifier that when he pulled the front of it off, it was about 50 pounds of weed. And I went, oh, I can help you. I just wanted to move it, man. This guy is amazed how fast I can get rid of I was making 7,000 to 10,000 a week. I was smoking 30 Fat Boys a day. Every day. My life was great. Before they come and kick my door in.
This guy is a serial murderer.
I think he's insane. He thought it was Jesus for real. I said, why did you do this to these people? He said, I saw my father do it.
He is just evil incarnate. We have to put him in the ground. We're gonna kill him. We're gonna kill him.
I lived all the way down on the end. They were nice, man. 74, that's where they arrested me, right in my apartment. Man, that was a bad day, man. I f***ed up and started moving coke.
Right.
And I started using the product, which really is not a good thing to do. They knocked on the door. I let them right in. The guy threw me to the ground, put a shotgun right here, and said, please just move, say anything. He told me, I'll blow your brains out. And I'm thinking, this guy sounds serious. So I was thinking of the song, All the Air That You Can Breathe, and I started singing that in my head, which kept me calm. I really believed they were there to get me for smuggling weed to the Eastern Shore. And the state's attorney said, I told you not to with me. They took me downtown, Ocean City's police department. I'm still in a pair of cut-off jeans. This guy tells me, you're being arrested for the murder of Ed Rice. I went, what? A couple weeks before they arrested me, the state's attorney said, we want to make a one-time deal. Give us your connection in California and Arizona where you're getting all this weight. I said, I'm not making no deals with anybody. I'm like the gingerbread man. Catch me when you can. And he got so freaking mad, man.
I'm gonna bury you.
He said, I'll bury you. I'll find a charge that you will never get out of. I said, well, I'll do your best. And off I went. When we went to Barracks E, that's when they took the lineup shots. I had a pair of cut-off jeans and no shirt no shoes. The guys that were in the lineup with me looked like cops because the way they were dressed, the way their hair was cut. And I was like, okay, I can see where this is going.
My name is Davis Ruark, and I'm formerly the state's attorney for Wycomico County, state of Maryland. Ed Rice owned the saddle shops, sold saddles, sold boots, Western clothing, but the belief was he had this secondary business, which was distribution of drugs to different people.
The guy that got killed, he lived right next to a trailer that you couldn't even get through without squeezing. There was that much pot stacked to the ceiling.
On June the 28th, in 1974, Paul Trivets just innocently walked into Rice's saddle shop. He bought a pair of boots. Looking around at the shirts, there was an individual who walked into the store. And then he saw this guy with some type of Halloween mask, and he also had a stocking holding it close to his head. The only conversation that Paul actually heard was, "Do you have anything for me?" And Mr. Rice said something to the effect of, "I don't have anything for you, Sonny." And then Paul Trivets heard some shots that were fired. The shooter approached Ed Rice closer and pulled the trigger a couple more times in the back. The shooter approached Paul Trivets, pulled up the gun, and said, "You're going to drive me away from here." And Paul Trivets started driving toward the city of Salisbury. And at that point, he actually pulled off this mask. And Paul Trivets was able to get a very, very good look at that individual. The shooter said, "I'm going to go ahead and get out here. Pull over." Paul Trivets drove immediately to the Salisbury Police Department. He went in and said, "I just saw somebody shot. I think he's dead." So they put together a photographic array, and there was a very positive identification by Paul Trivets that that's the one. And that's the one turned out to be Jack Trill. Jack was indicted for first-degree murder. He was also indicted for robbery and kidnapping of Paul Trivets.
I don't know who killed Ed Rice. I can tell you who didn't kill Ed Rice. Me. I did not kill Ed Rice.
I wanted to go back and face the judge because, first of all, they had absolutely no physical evidence that I did this. They had 3 people that said, "I think he did it." And that's it. So I'm thinking, what have I got to lose? But before the trial, Dr. Inslee was across from the jail. He had me on Paris 400s, Quaaludes, and Sanuquan. So when I went to court, I was like this. And the judge would ask something, and I go, "What?" And I didn't know what the hell was going on, you know? It wasn't a good trial.
I had a sentence of life plus 28 years. My attitude was more or less, I'm not getting out. I was in the cell when it had 40 days. Do you think I wanted to sit there and listen to him for hours?
Probably suffocated.
I had to sit in the same room. I would try to block it out of my mind. I just told him, when you feel like you need to tell me something, draw it, write it. And that's when he started, man. He was just going crazy right down. Haddon's art was kind of haunting, frightening, childlike quality, and definitely insanity. He would draw clues to other people he killed.
Haddon Clark had proven to us that he was not some sort of opportunistic murderer, that he in fact could fit the definition of being a serial killer.
Haddon told me I was on a Navy ship and I killed people that I know I'd never be found out because I'm on a Navy ship and we're only stopping here for a little bit.
What countries did you travel to in the Navy?
All over Asia. Australia, France, Italy, or west of Spain. Anybody that was off, just to track back up the monocle and see the progress. That allow people.
I remember him telling me a story in the Navy where he knew of some person who threw somebody off the back of the boat. And I know that means he did it. He threw somebody off the back of his boat.
So Detective Tarney never really let go of the notion of keeping in touch, investigating.
After we recovered Michelle's body, we're going up about once a week. Try to get more detail from him about these other bodies that he had claimed. It was a multi-jurisdictional investigation. So the FBI was involved in this, rendering assistance.
We were trying to just coax any kind of information out of him at the beginning of this. My name is Lou Luciano. I'm a retired special agent from the FBI.
That's so bad. I told you before about the first murder that you can remember. Even if you just have to close your eyes and read it.
Really hard person to have a conversation with.
Most of my victims, all my victims, I would say, our Lord, a lot of times would ask questions. So I might have asked the questions on the way down the Warson's Crossing. I think he cried. The reason why I say that is because I used to ask Penny lots of what I knew everything about Penny.
He wanders with the conversation.
This guy had a dog. My rabbit was twice the size of the dog. My rabbit just chased the dog around the door.
First time I actually encountered Haddon, I thought he was a performer.
Just growled at him. I had a white one too. He was an alcoholic. He's some bugs.
To keep Haddon Clark focused was exceptionally difficult, exceptionally exhausting.
Hello?
What?
Who is that talking to you?
Hello?
I'm here. Where were we in the conversation?
When they serve an ice cream cone to you, an ice cream cone, it's like this, they get to you like that.
If he gets off on another topic, it's going to take you an hour to get him back on to where you want him to go.
Getting so much ice cream cone, then I put hold like this.
He wanders with the conversations. Just about impossible to get anything out of. But he's very manipulative. And he would try to get you going in the direction that he wanted to go.
Look, my kids, that's me. That's me. Okay, that's Kristen.
It became apparent that he had multiple personalities.
What should you sign for name on this? Kristen.
One of his favorite names to refer to himself as was Kristen E. Bluefin.
That's not real name.
And as Haddon started to demonstrate that his more forceful personality and more prolific personality was this woman, he began to become her more in the moment. He would shift back and forth.
Haddon doesn't exist, okay? Kristen exists.
Kristen says that she killed Laura, not Haddon.
That's always wondered if that was Kristen.
Kristen is the one that is killing people.
Well, you could say I'm playing with you. I guess I really am playing with you.
I think Kristen was probably his wall, his shield.
I don't know. It's just the way Christian is.
He would just rock. And he wouldn't tell him nothing. That's why I told him. I said, I understand that you've never wanted to tell anybody anything. But you're the one that asked for me. He said, well, what do I have to do? I said, give me something. And that's when he said, I will give you the bucket of treasures that I kept from everybody I hurt or murdered.
Haddon made reference to the bucket in his conversations with Jack while they were in the cell together.
And he drew me a map where it was buried in Massachusetts at his grandfather's house.
I believe he had spent his summers there. There was boyhood playground, grandfather's place.
I saw an interrogation where you said you didn't love anybody, but you loved your grandfather. Is that true?
I love my grandfather, yeah. He said that he put a wheelbarrow on top of the bucket he buried to mark it. That's when we called Wellfleet Police Department and talked to Artie Parker.
So this is Pammon Point Road. This driveway is the driveway of the former Silas Clark house, who was Haddon Clark's grandfather. My name is Arthur Parker, and at the time I was a police sergeant for the town of Wellfleet, Massachusetts Police Department on Cape Cod. The front of the property was a terraced flower bed. It almost looked like it was a professional garden. The house is extremely remote from its neighbors. You could do just about anything there and probably do it undetected. While we were at that specific location, we found a garden cart. We turned it over, and the Mass Trooper canine handler had this large metal prod, and she was pushing the prod into this exposed area. And as it went into the ground, it made this sound with the sand. And I remember specifically Ed Tarney saying, take that and drop that right into the middle. We heard a very distinct bump hitting something solid. And that noise, when it was heard, put the hair up on the back of everybody's neck. We unearthed the bucket. I have a vivid memory of bringing the bucket back to Wellfleet Police Station, and on a blue tarp, we emptied the bucket and let the jewelry fall through.
It was just packed full of jewelry.
At that point, the thought that we all had was that we went from several victims to probably over 100.
But if you think about this bucket full of jewelry that's just been recovered, if you go to turn it over and dump it out, whatever was on the top was in the very bottom when the bucket was filled. And the three pieces of jewelry on the very top were pieces of jewelry that belonged to Laura Hodling. The question then remains, how many other victims are there?
When they found that bucket, they asked me, has he said anything else? Oh, yeah. He said, there's many others.
I meet people at the Red Cross. A lot of women want to date me in couple of them. I was taken to another part of the I come in the back way. They would get lost. They wouldn't know where I was.
You would take a date to the woods at night? So how would you even see anything?
I can see in the dark.
You'd hang out, what, have a fire? What would you do?
No fire, because wherever the fire was smoke, I don't know where I am. sat around, talked. I was texting him a bar.
Were you a smooth talker with women?
No.
During the Laura Holding investigation, when we were up searching Haddon Clark's truck, we found a detailed map of a cemetery. We were thinking that maybe Laura's body had been buried there. But we couldn't pinpoint where it was. We faxed a copy of the map to a couple jurisdictions up in the New England area.
And when it came through our fax machine, we knew exactly where that map was. It was the cemetery directly opposite the Wellfleet Police Department. I'm Richard Rosenthal, and I was Chief of Police for Wellfleet, Massachusetts.
This is Cemetery Road that leads to Oakdale and the Pleasant Hill Cemetery. And this is the cemetery that holds the Clark family plot, which is at the end of this road. When I initially arrived, I noticed a approximately 3-foot by 2-foot area of disturbance that had been freshly dug. And the area of disturbance that I initially saw was right here at family plot. The stones here represent Haddon's father and his grandmother and grandfather.
And that certainly got our attention.
So we brought in a Mass State Police cadaver dog, and the dog came over and alerted at that specific spot. Clark's plot contained the grandmother, grandfather, and father. However, all three were cremated. So there's no reason for the dog to alert based on what was legitimately interned there.
So we then notified Montgomery, who wanted to come as soon as they could.
That's when Detective Fallon and I jumped in the car and we just drove as fast as we could up there.
We dug down the area of disturbance, initially with shovels and then eventually with a machine, and we didn't find anything. There was nothing there.
We had no body. But it was curious where the cadaver dog had alerted on that site. And we still didn't know why.
We were fairly certain that that recent area of disturbance was because something came out of that hole, not because something went into it. So the question remained, what was there?
We cannot explain why we have dogs, cadaver dogs, alerted on the whole, but you gotta go out late, cemetery. Why don't the dogs think it?
Yeah, what was in that hole that you all want to know about?
Is it something we would be interested in?
I think so.
What type of things do you think we're interested in?
Girls.
Girls. Did you have a little girl on that grave?
Oh, girl.
How long has she been there?
6, 7 months.
Haddon told me that he had killed a little girl behind a stone wall. And he said he took the body and he took it up to his father's gravesite and buried it. This was 85 or 86. But he told me after he knew we were on him about the Laura Holding case. He slipped our surveillance. He went back up to the cemetery.
I know the police are chasing me all over Montgomery County. Come on. Next they'll be looking up Cape Cod. If They get me for one murder, they're gonna get me for another one.
And he said he took the body out of the gravesite, and that's where it had recently been disturbed. And that's why the cadaver dog alerted there.
Had a girl in the cemetery. We dug her up. Where'd you put her? I took the body. I left the cemetery to be moved from the hole. I went over to my grandfather's property.
He said he removed it to the back of his grandfather's property. The back of his grandfather's property is National Seashore property, and it's massive.
I like getting rid of bodies where I'm sentimental, think of visiting bodies. Did you ever ask this little girl her name? No. No, a lot of times when I ask little girls, I never asked them her name. I never even asked Michelle. I just knew who she was.
He didn't have a name. All he could say it was a little girl. He just said it was a little girl. We went through the timeline as to where he lived, where he frequented, where he had worked, just to see if they had any missing kids or females.
They were just throwing pictures of little girls on the table, and I'm like, I can't do this.
One of them was Sarah Pryor, who went missing in Wayland, Massachusetts.
What'd you do to her? Kill her. How'd you kill her? How did you do it? I ain't our judgment. Got blood everywhere. Jesus loves the little children. All children in the world. Red, yellow, black, and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children in the world.
My name is Sandra O'Brien. I was a Wayland police detective on the Sarah Pryor case. Sarah Pryor was 9 years old. On October 9th, when Sarah came home from school, she wanted to go for a walk. She left for 4:15-ish. The weather was a warm, beautiful day for October.
I, in my mind, expected she'd be back about 5 o'clock. And so I began to get concerned when she wasn't back at 5.
And it was not that long after that they called the police. There was a lot of hopefulness that she was just lost, having lived there only 6 weeks. So at that point, we called in the state police, the FBI. We set up a really big search with planes in the sky. It was over 1,000 police officers and people. The media picked up on the case right away, and they were out in force.
Soon, Wayland, Massachusetts was flooded with notices about Sarah's disappearance. The police seemed to take on more than just a professional obsession with finding her.
But we didn't find her. It was like she disappeared off the street and there was nothing. And when you don't find them in the first 48 hours, you really know something bad most likely happened.
As it turned out, it was years later that somebody walking their dog behind a stone wall in Wayland found a skull. There was no other bones. There was just the skull.
But right away, he thought of the Sarah Pryor case and called the Wayland police.
We have positively identified a portion of the remains of Sarah Pryor.
In our hearts, we have believed that Sarah has been in heaven for some time. And now we, her family and friends, will focus on remembering our precious Sarah.
That ended the search for Sarah herself. Our search then became for the suspect.
To the best of your recollection, did you go to the Sudbury, Wayland, Mass area there?
Yes, I do.
We found out that his father was living near Wayland at the time Sarah Pryor went missing.
On that weekend that Sarah Pryor was reported missing, Haddon Clark was on his way to visit with his father and his father's new wife, except that the father's new wife wanted nothing to do with him. And when he got there, they weren't there. And I think that he was pissed off.
I guess he was enraged that his father just left and didn't tell him where he was going.
In getting to know him a little bit more directly, we started to see this pattern of outrageous overreaction.
That's just what sets Clark off. It's just what motivates him to do stuff, to reach out and retaliate to somebody. And that's how Michelle got killed.
And then your father rejected you up there, and you lashed out just like you lashed out at Michelle. So what? Well, I killed him. It's the way I am. I'm a killer. Can you describe what you did? Her head right off. You cut her head right off?
Haddon said that he had beheaded a little girl on an Indian summer day.
Something on the Indian summers? I'm not sure. It's when it's October or something and it's real warm.
Haddon said he took her from a street side in Wayland.
I asked her directions. I got her on my truck.
He specifically mentioned cutting her throat. And he said the knife was so sharp to the point where her head just about came off.
He told me that he carried the torso out in a bag.
There's a head in that bag? There's a skull in that bag? Oh.
He left her head behind the stone wall.
Dropped it like a pillowcase. You dropped it like a pillowcase? Yeah, I'm doing my crime war holding. I thought that sucker by mistake.
And that's where it was recovered, behind the stone wall that he described.
We knew that Haddon had been in that area during the time that Sarah Pryor went missing, so we were relatively sure that we were on the right track with this.
We need more specifics about what's going on. Show me some paper.
We put a photo array together.
Well, remember those gone. Probably did kill Laura.
And he made a tentative identification of Sarah Pryor as a little girl he killed and buried at the gravesite in Cape Cod.
He was crazy thing back there.
And he removed it to the back of his grandfather's property.
Fishy, fishy, and look. Daddy kept young, running fry in the pen, and Kristen and Kim were off.
I don't think people. Have you ever done that? No, never eaten anyone.
During the course of the investigation, we were finding that he was spending more time during the interview process as Kristen E. Bluefin.
By the time when I got rid of something, you ain't gonna find it. I ain't gonna seek time now, Christian source. Christian loves hiding stuff. They got hidden stuff so good I can't even talk about it.
But we had kind of hit a bit of a stone wall with Haddon. He was being very piecemeal, very sketchy. He was only giving tiny tidbits of information. When we addressed him as Kristen, he would kind of come around a little bit. I think the well's a little bit dry right now. He's not telling me a whole lot. During one of the sessions, I said, well, have you got a picture of her? What's she look like? And that's when he showed me on a piece of paper a blonde-haired woman with blue eyes. And I remember him looking right at me and saying, this is me. This is Kristen. And I looked right at it and I said, holy sweet mother of God. It was like looking at a person I knew. And that person was actually a brand new special agent. Her name was Desiree Smith.
In approximately January, February of 2000, I received a phone call from Lou Luciano. He was hoping I would be interested in speaking to Haddon Clark and helping him with his investigation. I am Special Agent Desiree Smith, now retired, who was brought into the Haddon Clark case in my first year of employment with the FBI. I was always a little bit different than most other people. I'm very tenacious and I've had just a lot of confidence. So although I knew that this was a serial killer, if he ever gets out of jail, he's going to slit your throat, I still felt that I could do it. I had also gone into the FBI Academy after the Silence of the Lambs film.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
And idolized Jodie Foster on some level. So I thought this was a great opportunity to do something similar to what she was doing.
So we kept her outside. I remember that day he wore a wig. And I remember taking the picture that he had provided us with of Kristen E. Bluefin, sliding it over to him, and I said, I have a special surprise for you today. And I remember Haddon saying, what do you got?
Lou had told me that he is going to try and intimidate you. He's going to try and toy with you. So I was nervous, but of course I knew I couldn't act nervous. I walk in, and he immediately looks at me and kind of smiles. Kind of a creepy smile, but he smiles.
And Haddon, when he saw her, his facial expression, his entire body was like overwhelmed. He quite literally a Twinkie. And it was an individually wrapped, cream-filled Twinkie of just happiness.
He has these beady eyes and, he can stare at you. And, he tried that initially, giving me the evil Charlie Manson eyes. I had to act like it wasn't going to shock me or scare me. So I just acted like it wasn't fazing me. And then I just kept talking.
He looked right at Desiree Skinner and said, you're Kristen. We knew that we had him at that point because now he is seeing in living color 3D one of his fantasies.
I think you're a pretty girl. I like pretty girls.
She went in to talk to him, and she spent some time with him. I don't know, a half hour, perhaps more, I don't know.
So you said you wanted to talk to me. Did I want to be like you? I want to be you. I want to be you. Here, because it's all close to you. You want to get back in here for a look at? You talk to the fences, fire me, love yet. Well, you can talk me to help. You can I was told not to. Just make you scared. The reason I don't want to wear your clothes is because if I wore your clothes, I would want to kill you. I would want to make you tell me that you're my clothes and then I would kill me. I want you to say that. That's who you all think I'm Haddon, but I'm really twisted.
That was the sun coming out from behind the clouds at that point.
So I think I passed some of the tests with Haddon, at least initially. Once he had, I guess we'll call it, accepted me, then we became friends, and we would talk like girlfriends.
So the effect she had was he began flowing information. He started saying, I can help you.
He had been disclosing different people that he killed, different locations, and there were a few in particular that he felt that he could take the detectives and the FBI to.
They're looking for bodies that he's claimed he's killed all these different states. And due to the fact that he'll only express himself through me, I had to go.
So I was in the back seat of the car, and Desiree was also on the other side of Clark.
And then all of a sudden, everything changed.
Clark started going berserk. He was just moaning and screaming.
The hairs on the back of my neck went up. You know, that kind of psycho banshee scream, and it doesn't stop.
Làm sao vậy? Hải Đan ơi, mẹ đang dạy học nhá. Không nghịch đâu. Bố đang quay đấy nhá. Hôm nay mình sẽ gửi tới các bạn bài hát nữa, bài Em là hoa hồng nhỏ, một nhạc phẩm của nhạc sĩ Trịnh Công Sơn. Em sẽ là mùa xuân của mẹ, em sẽ là màu nắng của cha. Em đến trường học bao điều lạ, môi mỉm cười là những nụ hoa. Trang sách hồng nằm mơ màng ngủ, em gối đầu trên những dòng thơ. Em thấy mình là hoa hồng nhỏ, bay giữa trời là tháng ngày qua. Trời mênh mông đất hiền hòa, bàn chân em bước đi nhẹ nhẹ, đưa em vào tình người bao la. Cây có rừng bầy chim làm tổ, sông có nguồn như suối chảy ra. Tim mỗi người là quê nhà nhỏ, tình nồng thắm như mặt trời xa, tình nồng thắm như mặt trời xa. Em sẽ là mùa xuân của mẹ, em sẽ là màu nắng của cha. Em đến trường học bao điều lạ, môi mỉm cười là những nụ hoa. Trang sách hồng nằm mơ màng ngủ, em gối đầu lên những dòng thơ. Em thấy mình là hoa hồng nhỏ, bay giữa trời là tháng ngày qua. Trời mênh mông đất hiền hòa, bàn chân em bước đi nhẹ nhẹ, đưa em vào tình người bao la. Cây có rừng là bầy chim làm tổ, sông có nguồn từ suối chảy ra. Tim mỗi người là quê nhà nhỏ, tình nồng thắm như mặt trời xa, tình nồng thắm như mặt trời xa.
June 5th, 2018, Madison County, Mississippi. The sheriff's office receives a 911 call from a man who identifies himself as Walter Simpson. Simpson informs police that he has returned home to find the bodies of his wife, Philonda Simpson, and stepdaughter, Devonda Washington.
The manner in which this happened, this was a violent death and it was a struggle. These women fought for their lives.
There was a double murder. There were two victims that they were partially burned and that they were stabbed multiple times.
Following what is suspected to be a failed arson attempt, evidence is gathered and the police are able to quickly identify a suspect.
This was a very violent, very personal attack. Any time that you see someone stabbed as many times as one of the victims was stabbed, it's a personal attack.
This was a case that shocked both investigators and the local community of Madison County, Mississippi alike.
This case made an impact on me just by the sheer brutality of it. What I know as a 30-year lawman, that evil exists.
This is the story of the brutal murders of Philonda Simpson and her daughter Devonda Washington, and how justice was brought on a cold-blooded, green-eyed killer. On a balmy June night at 9:52 p.m., the usual peace of Madison County is interrupted when the sheriff's office receives a 911 call from a local man, Walter Simpson, concerning the discovery of the bodies of his wife and stepdaughter at his home in Crown Road.
It was relayed that the Madison County Sheriff's Department had been dispatched to the scene of a murder that happened at 109 Crown Road there in Camden. They were requesting the assistance of the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, where I'm employed.
So let's see, Matt Holcomb responded out there and Russell Kirby responded out there relatively quickly, and there were other officers. It was nighttime, so whoever was on night shift hustled out there to get there as quick as they could.
Camden, Mississippi is an extremely rural part of Mississippi, and Mississippi is a rural state. You don't get much more rural than Camden, Mississippi.
Quiet farmland, hunting land, not a lot of businesses up there. It's just more farmland and large acreage where people live.
It's a community that is by itself. People that live in Camden are usually from Camden, and it's an agriculture or farming community, whether that agriculture be crops or trees. It's a real rural, small, tight-knit community.
You feel like you're in the middle of nowhere, and then it just opens up and it's all these green pastures and all this acreage. That's a closer knit area of people maybe than the rest of the county.
There's a lot of old houses in Camden. There are some trailers, but I don't know if I would say that there's a lot of trailers.
There are no hotels, desolate up that way.
They're mostly family. It's a small, very tight-knit community. You know, there's not a lot of violent crime out there.
Following the 911 call made by Walter Simpson, investigators make their way to 109 Crown Road.
I, along with a crime scene technician, responded to the scene. We arrived, assessed the scene late evening, before midnight, but, after 9 o'clock. It was dark. Crown Road is a one-lane gravel road in the country, and it's not very well lit out there, and the house was dark except for the lights that were on in the carport, and there were some lights on in the house. There were other law enforcement officers that were there. The scene was being secured by the Madison County Sheriff's Department when we got there. Local people, including family members of what were later discovered inside as the deceased.
And they needed to secure the perimeter on the outside. The bodies were in the house, but they needed to preserve the entire scene, so they marked it off, because I think in no time at all, a lot of family and a lot of friends of the victims had shown up.
When we arrived, we went and began observing the outside of the residence. We made our way to the residence, and when we walked into the carport area, which was lit, you could see some bloody footprints, shoe impressions on the concrete underneath the carport.
There was a shop area out there, and I think pretty quickly, one of the investigators that had responded saw some bloody footprints going from the house, maybe out to that area, going to and from that area back to the house. So it was a murder. And once they went in and looked at the bodies, it was extremely horrific. The word I would use would be gruesome. I don't know that gruesome says enough for it. First of all, it's clearly a double homicide. You know right off the bat you've got a double homicide. And one of the victims was stabbed a few times. One of the victims was stabbed over 50 times. There was a hole in the skull maybe done by a hammer, blunt force trauma. You had all the stabbings all over the body, neck, face, lungs punctured. There was a smell of gasoline, and their bodies were charred. About as gruesome as it gets. I've seen a lot of murder scenes, a lot of pictures. I've been to a lot of autopsies. This one was gruesome. It was bad.
Philonda was a good mother. Philonda was a good daughter. She was trying to go to college at Belhaven University here in the Jackson area.
Walter Simpson, who had made the 911 call, was the spouse of one victim and the stepfather of the other. He told him what he had observed. I think later he gave a statement.
In his statement to the police, Walter reports that earlier that day at around 3:05 p.m. he left Camden and made the approximately 90-minute drive to Grenada. It was when he got home at 9:40 p.m. that he stumbled over something while entering his home.
He gave a story. I love it when they give a story, regardless of what it is, because it's going to tie them to it.
June 2018, Madison County Police Department is investigating the murders of Philonda Simpson and her daughter Devonda Washington. When investigators enter the property, they are met with a shockingly violent scene. The bodies of the mother and daughter are found with multiple stab wounds, and both have been set alight. The killer has executed the double homicide with a disturbing level of brutality, which has left the kitchen covered in blood.
There was a door to the inside of the house that was in the carport. We opened that door and immediately saw two bodies on the floor. There was a lot of blood that was on the floor that had pooled and already coagulated. We noticed that there was one female that was face down, there was one female that was face up. In the middle, near the body closest to the door, was what appeared to be a gas can that had been set on fire and melted into the floor. A lot of blood on the floor, a lot of blood cast off, which indicated that someone had blood on their hand or had blood on the item that they were using and were swinging their arms and casting that blood off.
There's blood spatter on the walls, so that told us whoever did this was angry enough, bringing the object back, and it was slinging blood on the walls. The victims were mother Philonda and the stepdaughter Devonda. They were both clothed in shorts and t-shirts, I believe.
I believe we were informed that there was a double murder, that there were two victims, that they were partially burned, and that they were stabbed multiple times. Philonda Simpson had been stabbed 4 times, and Devonda had been stabbed, I believe, 54 times, and that 18 of those were defense wounds.
There were bruise marks on the arms of Devonda, especially from where she was being stabbed, and lower torso and to her legs, and we suppose that she was kicking and fighting and trying to save her life. Philonda was stabbed in the neck and the upper torso. Philonda and Devonda had thermal injuries from the fire.
The bodies were burned from the floor, partially up their arm, but not completely. It was the worst one I've ever seen. It was nasty, gruesome. I mean, words can't describe it. The smell, the chemical smell.
This was a very violent, very personal attack. Anytime that you see someone stabbed as many times as one of the victims was stabbed, it's a personal attack. You knew that someone close to the victim was probably the one that perpetrated the crime.
Upon entering the crime scene and coming across the bodies of Devonda and Philonda, investigators get to work, analyze the home, and attempt to piece together exactly what has happened that day.
The doors, when we got on scene, the doors were secure, so it told me there was no forced entry. We believe the doors being shut to the house allowed the fire to smother out, so therefore the fire couldn't get oxygen and just put itself out. There was blood spatter on the walls. There was bloody footprints on the floor around the bodies, blood spatter on the bodies. It was obvious there was a pretty good struggle in that kitchen. That's where everything contained itself to.
With there being no signs of forced entry, the investigators begin gathering evidence inside the crime scene.
They're starting to collect some physical evidence there at the scene. I believe there was a lighter found there at the scene.
And I remember that there was a partially burned, looked like a roll of paper towels or something that they recovered that indicated to law enforcement that that was probably what was used to attempt to start the fire.
Bloody footprints going from the home to the shop, and there's bloody footprints coming back.
We noticed some broken glass in the home, in the kitchen area. We noticed the gas canister. We noticed the smell of gas in the air, the smell of death in the air, really. It's an odor that you'll never forget once you smell it.
They also could tell that someone had attempted to pour gasoline on the bodies and inside the home and tried to set it on fire, but the fire did not. It burned their bodies, but it did not take throughout the whole house.
So the evidence that we collected, of course, we collected blood samples. We collected the gasoline canister. We collected the bodies. We collected the knife after we found it.
Friends and family of the victims are questioned. The investigators are seeking any information relating to this gruesome murder.
Trying to get a story, get a backstory of what had happened, what might have happened, and how that all came about. Philanda's brother, Jimmy, was there. He was very distraught. His sister and his niece had just passed away, and he knew that.
Through questioning Walter Simpson and the friends and family of the victims, the investigators learn of how the relationship between Walter and Philanda began.
They met around Memphis, I believe, from a lady from the church introduced them.
They met at church, dated for about 8 months, and then married in April of 2017.
Philanda had found out prior to the day that she died that Walter had an ex-girlfriend that he had stabbed in her eye, and he'd been to prison for that. And she did not previously know about that, I guess right before all this happened. And she was really upset and really, really scared of him.
Walter Simpson grew up in Winona, Mississippi, which is a small town roughly 50, 60 miles from the Camden area. He had served some time in prison before. He was arrested in the late 90s for aggravated assault.
When Walter Simpson was questioned whether he had any criminal history, Walter stated that he'd been in a little bit of trouble for stealing a Snickers bar one time, and that been accused of and had done a little time for assaulting another woman.
Back in 1997, Walter was dating a girl in North Mississippi. They got in a big argument. She went to go stay with the mother. Another argument ensued there. The girlfriend went back to her apartment. When she went back to her apartment, she saw the storage room door broken into. So her and her son walk into her apartment. Out comes Walter. Walter struggles, stabs her, cuts her left eye out, assaults the son. The girlfriend's uncle comes in, breaks it up. Walter flees.
He told us that night that he was arrested for grand larceny and aggravated assault. And when we asked him to describe it, he stated that he stole some Snicker bars and arguing with his girlfriend, and accidentally she was cut in the face one time by a knife that she grabbed.
Turns out he had cut her eye out.
She, of course, has to go to the hospital. Well, Walter breaks into the hospital somehow, and once nurse staff realize the assaulter is in the hospital, they put it on lockdown, and Walter escapes. Walter is later apprehended after a police chase in that same small town in Grenada in a stolen car.
I believe got sentenced to 20 years and served a little more than half of that. I believe he'd actually served 11 years for aggravated assault for cutting a woman's eye out.
So he had done that before, served 11 years, been out and had, probably done pretty well for himself, staying out of trouble. But he's a violent man, and Violent men do violent things.
After Philonda found out about the ex-girlfriend and his past and the fact that he was convicted of a felony, Philonda and Walter went to Memphis and lived with another preacher and his wife who was also over the church as well. And they lived in Memphis for a while with them. I took it as sort of like a extended counseling type. They were gonna go stay with their friends who were gonna help them through this. After they lived with them for a while, they moved back to Camden, to their residence, and they had not been back long when this happened.
Investigators are later informed that on the very day of her murder, Philonda had made some critical decisions over her marriage to Walter Simpson.
Family members and friends had relayed to us that Philonda had texted one of them to say, "Pray for us. I'm going to tell Walter that I'm getting a divorce tonight." And that was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon that she had sent that text.
Shortly into the investigation, a friend of the murdered daughter, Devonda Washington, comes to the police station to speak with the investigators, providing them with some breakthrough evidence.
A friend of Devonda's, he heard of the murder. Him and his dad came to the sheriff's department, and the boy was upset. He's like, he did it, he did it. We're like, who did it? He said, Walter, Devonda's stepdad. Why did he say he did it? Man, he's been coming on to her and she just tired of it. She texts me. So his text showing in that time frame, that evening of June 5th, shows that he come on to her and Devonda contacted the friend that showed up.
I believe that Devonda had told her mother and showed her text messages that Walter had sent, showed her photos, and I believe there was even a video that showed that Walter had made some inappropriate advances towards her. Philonda did not approve and was going to tell Walter that she was going to divorce him. Devonda had messages on her phone that she was letting her mother know that, you know, this guy's a creep and this guy's been making advances on me and he's not loyal to you.
So Devonda left the house, went to a local gas station, waited for her mother to come home with the family car. They were gonna kick Walter out. It was obviously they were gonna kick Walter out because when I got there was bags of clothes in the hallway, all bundled up like long bags stuffed with men's clothes.
We later learned that Philonda had put Walter's clothes in those trash bags and more than likely had told him that he was not welcome there anymore that night.
So they were gonna kick Walter out that day because they're tired of him coming on to Devonda.
It is at this point in the investigation that a family friend comes forward to reveal she had been on the phone with Walter's wife, Philonda, at 3:38 p.m. on the day of the murder. Philonda had been bagging up husband Walter's clothes whilst on the call, when all of a sudden screams could be heard down the phone line.
The last thing that happened on Philonda's phone is that she was on the phone with the woman in Memphis.
Philonda had, confided in her some things that had happened, had talked to her about leaving Walter.
The woman in Memphis heard a scream.
And the phone disconnected.
June 2018, with investigators gathering evidence and witness statements relating to the brutal murder of Philonda Simpson and her daughter Devonda Washington, investigators turn their attention to Philonda's husband, Walter Simpson. When questioned on his whereabouts during the murder of Devonda and Philonda, Walter Simpson tells the police he was away from home as he had left that day to go to Grenada, Mississippi.
First thing we needed to do was talk to Walter, because at the scene, like I said, he didn't show any emotion. Later that evening, approximately 2:45, once we left the scene of the house, we interviewed Walter that night and spent about an hour talking to him. The interview was basically getting a background on Walter, then getting a background on Walter and Philonda, and then getting a background on Walter's day.
He left a little after 3 o'clock that evening from Crown Road, claimed to go up north to Grenada, Thunder on the Lake. He claims he went up there to go check on his haircutting license. Well, he claims the guy wasn't there. And when he came back from driving around Thunder on the Lake in Grenada, he drove back by the barbershop and bumped into the hairdresser. The hairdresser hasn't been in business. He was shutting down because financial reasons. So Walter would not have had any business being up there asking for a certificate. He told us that he drove to Grenada around Thunder on the Lake and was going to stop and visit his mother. I asked where does she live, did he visit her? No, I didn't visit her, I don't know where she lives, I didn't have her phone number. I know where my mom lives. Drove back south to Camden around 9:40 is when the call came in. He walked in the kitchen, and when he walked in the kitchen, he claims he stumbled over his wife. That's when he claimed he turned the light switch on. That was a lie. When you open the door, you still have another 5 feet before you get to Falunda. The light switch is by the door. He could have easily walked in, turned the light switch on, then seen the bodies, but he didn't walk in and stumble over them looking for the light switch.
At that point, I noticed some inconsistencies in his statement, some things that were just raising red flags on top of the red flags that had already been raised, stating that he had driven, an hour and a half to Grenada for a 15-minute conversation, that he didn't know where his mother lived, that he had been arrested for stealing Snicker bars but was charged with grand larceny, that his girlfriend had accidentally cut herself in the face while they were arguing and he was charged with aggravated assault and served 11 years. That didn't make sense. And at that time I went ahead and read him his Miranda rights under the Constitution, and he agreed to continue talking. We talked for another probably 30 minutes. He didn't say anything to incriminate himself, but there were definitely some red flags that needed to be checked out further.
With rising suspicions of Walter's behavior and whereabouts on June 5th, the investigators turned to several vehicles located at the family home at the time of the double murder.
The car that was on the premises, it turned out, had a GPS tracker on it, and he had used that car, and it didn't match up at all with the story that he'd been given.
Law enforcement always run the car tag to make sure that car belongs where it is and to figure out what's going on with whatever's there. So they did that in this case. They found that that car had a lien on it. Oftentimes when a car has a lien on it and people are making payments to the place where they bought the car, it will have a GPS tracker on the car. So if they quit making their payments, they can go find the car and repossess it. That happened in this case. It was a lucky break for us. We subpoenaed the records, the GPS records. They're incredibly accurate. And it showed us that the story that Walter had told law enforcement was not true. They could tell by the track that car made that he did not go where he had told them that he went.
So Walter's original story, he'd gone to Grenada, Mississippi, which is north of Madison, gone to a barber shop, maybe stopped by to see somebody else, and then he got back to the house around 9:40 that night and discovered the bodies. The GPS track told a different story. He had been to Winona, Mississippi, and they were able to track exactly where he'd been to Winona, Mississippi.
They found that he actually went to a residence that turned out to be a family residence. They did a search warrant for that residence and the outside areas and found a burn pile.
That burn pile had burnt clothing, boots. There was a cap to the gas can that was recovered at the house in that burn pile in Winona.
When the charred remnants of work boots are found in the pile of burnt belongings, investigators immediately circle back to the bloodied footprints identified at the crime scene.
You could tell that someone had walked around in there, and obviously it wasn't either one of the women because their injuries they sustained. It was very clear that those footprints were not from law enforcement. They were obviously from the person who had killed them. When we figured out Walter's comings and goings after the murders, we figured he burned the shoes in the burn pile.
During the investigation, forensic experts collect and test swab samples and blood found at the house and in the vehicle.
There was some swabs from a brake and gas pedal of a vehicle. There was a swab of the driver's seat. There's also a swab of the seat control. There was a set of keys that were submitted, a water bottle that was also submitted, and I believe a lighter that was submitted to the lab.
There was a lighter from the dryer that was in the carport. There's numerous blood swabs taken. When I got on scene, deputies got on scene, Walter was talking. He was sitting in the car, the family car. FBI investigators swabbed the car. They noticed blood on the lumbar seat, the gear shift, brake pedal. He claims he just drove up, walked in, stumbled on the bodies. There was no reason for the blood to be in that car in those particular spots.
Ultimately, we discovered that the blood in the vehicle belonged to Philonda Simpson, and the blood on the water bottle belonged to Devonda Washington. There was a lighter that was submitted, and we found his DNA profile on that lighter. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's considered the blueprint of the human body, and that's what gives us our genetic characteristics that we can see on a day-to-day basis. For example, someone may say, oh, you have your mother's eyes, or you have your father's smile. Those are genetic markers that we can see. There's also genetic markers on the DNA molecule itself that we can use, and we can exploit that to make identifications and associate people with certain items of evidence. He may have had that impression that, the fire would have consumed everything, but I've worked several cases where people have tried to burn evidence and burn bodies, and there's usually always something behind that we can find that may be of significance.
Based on the roll of paper towels and the lighter that was found, and they could smell accelerant. When they put their bodies on the autopsy table, they collect whatever debris falls off of the bodies and put it, honestly, in a paint can. We could smell the accelerant still even years later. So they could smell accelerant, they saw the partially burned paper towels, and they knew that someone had started the fire intentionally. I do think he thought the whole house would go up in smoke. Fires need oxygen. His mistake was closing the door. Had he succeeded in burning the house down, our case would have been a lot more difficult because it would have been really hard to tell what had happened to those women.
You leave DNA behind everywhere when you sweat, touch something. It's unique to that person and that person alone. Blood was positively ID'd as being Walter's or Walter's blood type. The significant part of this case revolved around the GPS, the text messages, the phone conversations from the witnesses. We got the GPS coordinates that matched to Poorhouse Road, that matched that burn pile. We knew we had our guy.
June 2018. Following the brutal murder of Philonda Simpson and her daughter Devonda Washington, investigators are swiftly honing in on Walter Simpson, the husband of Philonda, as their #1 suspect. June 5th, the day of the double murder. At 2:30 p.m, Devonda tells her friend over the phone that Walter has been making sexual advances towards her, the most recent being earlier that day.
So Devonda had just recently disclosed to someone close to her that Walter had come on to her, made advances toward her, sexual advances. He had called her back into a room, exposed himself to her. She was scared of him. She didn't trust him. She was going to tell her mother, and she communicated that. Walter had basically tried to have sex with his stepdaughter, and she was having none of it, and she was going straight to her mother with it.
So Devonda left the house, went to a local gas station, waited for her mother to come home with the family car. They were going to kick Walter out. As soon as Philonda came home from her meeting from Lexington, she picked up Devonda at the gas station where Devonda left her car. They drove a few miles up the road to the family home. They started packing Walter's clothes because the garbage bag's in the hallway.
When Walter is informed that his harassment of Devonda was the last straw and Philonda is going to divorce him, events rapidly escalate and screams are heard by Philonda's friend who is on a call with her.
And then according to this witness, she heard screaming and then the phone hung up.
While Philonda's on the phone with her church member, she walks in and the church member hears the hollering and screaming. Walter kills Philonda.
He just did not believe that she would ever say no to him or leave him or anything like that.
The reason why Philonda walked in to the kitchen is because she heard what we believe she heard, screaming coming from there or struggle. She walks in and sees Devonda already dead on the floor. So Philonda, we believe, is the second victim. This was a case where sudden, onset anger, he didn't have time to go search for a weapon. It was there. He used what he had at his disposal, a large butcher knife.
Walter Simpson was absolutely a jealous man. You can tell that from his prior situation with his ex-girlfriend, and you can tell it in this case. He wanted what he wanted, and he wasn't going to let anything stop him.
He loved her, or he wanted to have relations with her, and Devonda refused, and this has been ongoing. So he had that mentality, I believe, is if I can't have you, nobody can have you. So he killed her.
He was just mad that she had told her mother and that her mother was wanting a divorce. And I think that's what enraged him, was that instead of him breaking it off with her, that she was trying to break it off with him, which is a similar story to what had happened to him back when he slashed his first girlfriend's face.
With witness statements coming in, alongside the mounting evidence being found at the burn pile, the family home, and in the vehicles at the crime scene, investigators become confident that Walter Simpson, the sole suspect in this case, is guilty of the double murder.
After law enforcement had that official statement from Walter, and they compared it to the GPS locations from the car, they knew that he was lying. They could tell that that car had gone somewhere he left out of his story. That, coupled with Philonda's blood in the vehicle, Walter's blood on the lighter that was found under the carport. So all those three things together let them know he was about to be in serious trouble.
I think that his plan, as far as burning the bodies and pouring the gas and lighting the fire to cover up anything that would tie him to the crime. But the house didn't burn.
June 6th, the anonymous 911 call that told us that Walter was burning stuff in a fire pit where he was standing there naked. That morning, still on June 6th, when we received the GPS coordinates of the car, that in the fire pit, we knew we had our guy.
Walter Simpson called law enforcement and was kind of hounding them about getting his car back. Law enforcement kept the car to do all their testing and all their search warrants, and they didn't give it back in case they had to do additional stuff to the car. So he was calling and calling.
Walter, we'll give you the car, but are you wondering where we're at in the investigation? Have we developed a suspect? Oh, yeah. Are y'all getting closer to find my family's killer? Yeah, Walter, we are.
Once they decided to charge him, law enforcement called him under the guise of, hey, come get the car. And when he showed up, he was actually arrested and charged with the murders of the two women.
We brought him into investigations. Said, look, we have a few more questions we need to ask you. We read him his Miranda rights. He decided he wanted a court-appointed attorney then. That's when I slid him the picture of his dead wife on the gurney. And I told him, if I have to look at these pictures, you ought to also. And that's when he pointed and laughed in a sadistic way, saying, ha, 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 is that my wife? This guy's sick. He's the one who did it, there's no doubt. I mean, I've never met anybody like him.
There were no good qualities about Walter. He was all about Walter. He was an extremely jealous man. His jealousy had already landed him in prison once, where he served 11 years. He didn't learn his lesson from that. He's married to a woman, yet he wants her daughter. She refuses. He's jealous. If he can't have her, no one else can. And his obsessiveness with Walter's obsessiveness with Walter, led him to represent himself in the trial.
I've had a couple of cases where a defendant has chosen to represent themselves. And it's always interesting because we never know where the questions are coming from or what they're trying to hope to accomplish by their questions. So it's always a bit different than if a seasoned attorney questions us. So, like I said, in this case, it was a little bit different, a little bit interesting to see where he would go or what he would say.
But he had spent 11 years in the penitentiary, so he thought that he knew more law than a lawyer. And it's been my experience that that those that have served time before usually think they are way smarter than they actually are. They watch shows like this and try and figure out what not to do and how to get away with something, and never works out for them quite that well.
And that's one of a prosecutor's biggest nightmares. You would think we would love to have people represent themselves. We hate it. You've heard the saying that anyone who represents themselves has a fool for a client. And Walter Simpson is a bona fide fool, and he represented himself. And the reason that's difficult is they don't know how to try a case. They don't know the rules of evidence. They don't know what's admissible, what's not. And when you've got attorneys on the other side, you make objections. They're ruled on. The judge is your gatekeeper of evidence. Here, when they're consistently doing things that they shouldn't be doing, a seasoned prosecutor does not want to keep standing up and objecting because you're afraid of what the jury may be thinking. Are you picking on this guy? Or are you being difficult? Or are you hiding something? No, he's just not doing it right. But Scott Regilio, who was prosecuting, did an outstanding job in the case, and he let Walter dig himself a hole too that he couldn't get out of. It was almost like he believed everything that he was saying, and he felt like that he had found a hole in our case, and it wasn't. He was arguing these times, and he didn't realize that the times that he was arguing was not even the same time zone that we were dealing with. He was arguing Eastern time, and how could this have happened when I was supposed to be here, and this, that, and another, and when in fact we were dealing with Central Time.
Having people's cell phones and having Devonda and Philanda's cell phones, it was almost as though they could testify for us even though they weren't there. It was truly amazing that law enforcement found these text messages on Philanda's phone to her friend that told her, Walter tried to touch my daughter, we're getting a divorce, I'm going right now. And we were able to add those text messages to the timeline of when the car left the house from the GPS coordinates from the car, and put together a timeline of these women's day through their cell phones.
Walter showed no signs of remorse. He preached to that jury. He thought he had won the day, but he was the only one in the courtroom that felt that way.
On January 4th, 2021, Walter Simpson is sentenced to 2 life sentences for the 2 counts of murder, 20 years for arson, and 10 years for possession of a deadly weapon by a convicted felon.
He's got 80 years over his head, day for day. It's as good as a death sentence.
What I know as a 30-year lawman, that evil exists and people need to be protected. It's up to us to do a good job as investigators to ensure that these bad people are locked up and kept away from the public.
It is thanks to the brilliant work of the investigating agencies that Walter Simpson was placed under arrest so soon after committing his crimes.
Really proud of the law enforcement agencies for putting together a quick case, and for us getting to the courtroom as quick as we did to put people at peace, that our justice system works.
This case is one that stands out, that they were able to get all this together this quickly and make this arrest so fast, that he was arrested within 3 days of these women being killed. I know that brought peace to the family, that the person who was responsible for this was going to be held responsible for it. I'm also sure that they were heartbroken that it was Walter Simpson. They don't all happen like that. And so it was really amazing that they worked so hard and got this one so quickly.
The Madison County Sheriff's Office has a really big area to cover, and they're a good agency. The fact that they were able to respond to this, put the case together as quickly as they did. Again, this is a community in Camden that doesn't experience a lot of this, so people are scared, they're nervous. And so to bring closure pretty quick as far as who did it, you knew there wasn't a serial killer out there running around. You knew it wasn't a stranger. It was actually Walter Simpson.
Philanda was a good mother, a devout Christian, and she believed that Walter was also a good Christian and a good man. Devonda wanted to be a nurse, I believe, and She was working hard to improve her life and be the best person that she could be. It's just sad that such a young person was killed at an early age for sick desires of an older fella.
This is one of the cases that stays with you.
I think there's justice that he will not be able to do this to anybody else again, and he'll spend the rest of his life in prison.
I mean, the person who's deceased is gone. They're not coming back. There may be some measure of satisfaction when someone gets convicted, but I think there's always going to be that open wound with victims and their families.
I feel so lonely and empty. I listen to each of my own breaths. I heard every writhing pain, torn apart in painful nostalgia. What love is filling me. Then this heart has to fight again, so both had to suffer. Hello, now I know what to do when nostalgia always overflows.
Friends and family of the victims are questioned. The investigators are seeking any information relating to this gruesome murder.
Trying to get a story, get a backstory of what had happened, what might have happened, and how that all came about. Philanda's brother, Jimmy, was there. He was very distraught. You know, his sister and his niece had just passed away, and he knew that.
Through questioning Walter Simpson and the friends and family of the victims, the investigators learn of how the relationship between Walter and Philanda began.
They met around Memphis, I believe, from a lady from the church introduced them.
They met at church, dated for about 8 months, and then married in April of 2017.
Philanda had found
accidentally, she was cut in the face one time by a knife that she grabbed.
Turns out he had cut her eye out.
She, of course, has to go to the hospital. Well, Walter breaks into the hospital somehow, and once nurse staff realize an assaulter is in the hospital, they put it on lockdown, and Walter escapes. Walter is later apprehended after a police chase in that same small town in Grenada in a stolen car.
I believe got sentenced to 20 years and served a little more than half of that. I believe he'd actually served 11 years for aggravated assault for cutting a woman's eye out.
So he had done that before, served 11 years, been out and had, probably done pretty well for himself, staying out of trouble. But he's a violent man, and violent men do violent things.
After Philonda found out about the ex-girlfriend and his past and the fact that he was convicted of a felony, Philonda and Walter went to Memphis and lived with another preacher and his wife who was also over the church as well. And they lived in Memphis for a while with them. I took it as sort of like a extended counseling type. They were gonna go stay with their friends who were gonna help them through this. After they lived with them for a while, they moved back to Camden, to their residence, and they had not been back long when this happened.
Investigators are later informed that on the very day of her murder, Philonda had made some critical decisions over her marriage to Walter Simpson.
Family members and friends had relayed to us that Philonda had texted one of them to say, "Pray for us. I'm going to tell Walter that I'm getting a divorce tonight." And that was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon that she had sent that text.
Shortly into the investigation, a friend of the murdered daughter, Devonda Washington, comes to the police station to speak with the investigators, providing them with some breakthrough evidence.
A friend of Devonda's, he heard of the murder. Him and his dad came to the sheriff's department, and the boy was upset. He's like, he did it, he did it. We're like, who did it? He said, Walter, Devonda's stepdad. Why did he say he did it? Man, he's been coming on to her, and she just tired of it. She texts me. So his text showing in that time frame, that evening of June 5th, shows that he come on to her, and Devonda contacted the friend that showed up.
I believe that Devonda had told her mother and showed her text messages that Walter had sent, showed her photos, and I believe there was even a video that showed that Walter had made some inappropriate advances towards her. Philonda did not approve and was going to tell Walter that she was going to divorce him. Devonda had messages on her phone that she was letting her mother know that, this guy's a creep and this guy's been making advances on me and he's not loyal to you.
So Devonda left the house, went to a local gas station, waited for her mother to come home with the family car. They were gonna kick Walter out. It was obvious they were gonna kick Walter out because when I got there was bags of clothes in the hallway, all bundled up like long bags stuffed with men's clothes.
We later learned that Philonda had put Walter's clothes in those trash bags and more than likely had told him that he was not welcome there anymore that night.
So they were gonna kick Walter out that day because they're tired of him coming on to Devonda.
It is at this point in the investigation that a family friend comes forward to reveal she had been on the phone with Walter's wife, Philonda, at 3:38 p.m. on the day of the murder. Philonda had been bagging up husband Walter's clothes whilst on the call, when all of a sudden screams could be heard down the phone line.
The last thing that happened on Philonda's phone is that she was on the phone with